In the spirit of starting simple and then adding complexity to a painting, a fantastic way to render is to simplify the object first into a planar analysis. The next pass is to take that faceted shape and then to smooth it out into the rendered form. In this video, I'll focus on the brush technique that I like to use for this sort of smooth blending. But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the CtrlPaint store. For this, I like to use a flat, hard brush. And because it's got some directionality to it, I'm going to need to keep this brush palette open to the Brush Tip Shape tab while I work. This will allow me to change the brush tip angle by manipulating this thumbnail here that you can see. Also, before I start, I'm going to turn down the flow of the brush tool to about 60%. This means that I'll be letting less pigment out of the brush at a time, which will make for some softer rendering. In order to smooth out this planar analysis, I'll be using on-screen mixing with the brush tool and the eyedropper. And you should also note that I'm making sure the brush tip angle is perpendicular to the form. This helps me make sure that the brush marks will work with the form and not fight against it. So the first step is to make a new layer, and then on that layer, I'll be painting with this sampled color from the left face. And I'll pull the paint across the threshold, and in doing so, make that transition. And now I'll select some from the center face and paint that back in the opposite direction. And I'll start one last time from the left face, sample there, and paint back over the threshold. And when I'm done with all this, I'll switch to the eraser tool and erase away what I don't need. You could also use a mask for this if you wanted. So you can see the technique is pretty straightforward. Now that you've seen the theory of this brush technique, let's give it a try on this apple. So I'll make a new layer and pick two facets that I want to blend between, and then line up the perpendicular brush tip. Now sample from one and paint towards the other. And then I'll go back in the opposite direction, sampling from the middle and pulling it over across the threshold. I'll do one more quick example. This time going up and down instead of side to side. So I'll make a new layer, sample from the bottom, pull it into the top, and then sample from the top and pull it down towards the bottom. So it's a back and forth push and pull like this, and eventually you'll smooth out all those transitions between those hard facets. And since this process is pretty straightforward, I'm not going to bore you with blending the entire apple. So go ahead and download the file that I provided at the bottom of the post and give it a try yourself. This is one of those techniques that just takes a lot of practice, so don't expect to nail it on your first try. Have fun painting! Hey guys, this is Matt Core from CtrlPaint.com, and today we're going to revisit an older subject, and that is blending from a faceted surface into a smooth surface. So if you haven't watched this earlier video, and I'm going to link it in the bottom of the post, watch this first. This is where I'm going to show the technique. But it's one of those things that just works better with more practice. So today's video, I'm going to give you a way to keep practicing this. But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the CtrlPaint store. Now if we take a look here, I've got Google SketchUp open, and I've made some simple faceted shapes. Nothing fancy. Now I'm going to export these simple faceted shapes right into Photoshop, and we'll start painting over top of them. Now in the previous video, you saw that I primarily used a flat brush for this. Well, right now I'm not going to use a flat brush, I'm going to use a round brush. But really, you can do it with any kind of brush you want. The important thing is making those smooth transitions from one surface to another. So here I'm using a hard round with a bit of texture in it. And I've got my flow set to about 50%. So to get this going, I'll just be making new temp layers, sampling, and painting a little over the edge. So to go between these two facets, I want to create sort of a smooth roll-off. So I'll paint gently with one color, and then select the color from the opposite face and paint it back in the other direction. And what I get is sort of a nice middle transition. Pretty quickly, that looks much more organic and realistic than it did when it came out of SketchUp with that hard line drawn there. And how you want to transition between these faces is up to you. Let's say I want to make a much more gradual slope between these next two faces. Well, this might actually be better with a airbrush. So here I'm going to make almost like a ski slope down here. I've made a new layer, and I'm painting in the same process, although this time I'm doing a much more gradual transition. It's going to take a further amount of distance to transition from one plane into the next. And I could even give it a little bit of a highlight. So I'll select the color there, move it a little up in value, and paint that in there. And I'll merge all those layers together and mask away what I don't want. What you're looking at here is a 3D model, and this is a little bit different from the example I gave in the previous video. But when you have circles inside of a 3D model, sometimes they come out more like 10 or 12-sided faces. And probably your painting doesn't want to have that in it. So it's a good idea to get rid of those sorts of obvious faceting. And you can do that in the same way. Just sample and paint. And maybe I want to have a little bit more of an edge transition here. So I'll make a new layer. I'll select an airbrush. And I'll give it a little bit of a highlight where the light catches this bevel. Erasing away what I don't want. So here you can see with just a few minutes of blending and smoothing, I've taken a pretty rigid object and smoothed it out a bit. In a way, I'm sort of mentally sculpting, giving it a different shape than it had originally. But all the values that I put in place were based off of ones that were already there in the initial render. So I'm going to attach this image at the bottom of the post, and you can try smoothing out the rest of it yourself. And really, you saw that what I made was just simple shapes inside of SketchUp. So if you've got SketchUp, make your own. This sort of blending is incredibly important, so give it some extra practice. Have fun, guys. Thanks for watching. In the past, I've talked about painting with a soft, round brush, almost like an airbrush. And then since the paint is on its own layer, switching to the eraser tool, using a hard eraser, and carving out a sharp edge. And in this way, getting both a soft edge and a hard edge. And then as you continue, you'd make a new layer, lay down more paint, and erase, and continue this process. In today's video, I'm going to show you a slight variation on this theme, and how it might apply to more technical edge control areas. But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the CtrlPaint store. Here you can see I've got a quick tracing of a skull. And the reason I didn't just draw this is because what I'm working on today is rendering. So I don't really want to waste time doing a careful line drawing if all I really want to practice is painting inside of it. So I've made this tracing, and I want to do some of the simple shadowing underneath. With my line work layer on top, You can see that's in red here. I'm going to be painting on all layers below the line work. So I'll make a new layer, select the brush tool, change to a hard round brush. So it looks just like this. It's got pressure sensitivity but hard edge. And using that brush, I'll begin on the hard edge of the shadow. And right now, that happens to mean the edge of the form. And using this hard brush, it gives me nice control of that edge. It's a lot easier to get that exact shape if you're working with a hard brush than it is if you're working with a soft brush. And you notice I'm not being very careful about the other edge, which is going to be the soft edge of my shadow. And I'll show you what we do with that in a minute. Okay, so I've put in my hard edge using the hard brush. Now I'll switch to the eraser tool, select a soft round eraser, and then I'll erase away the soft edge of the shadow. This is where the paint is going to transition from the dark area into the light area. And obviously I'd be a bit more careful if this were a finished piece, but I'm just giving you guys a quick example. So in this way I've started with a hard edge and then erased away the soft edge. So I get the best of both worlds. Now let's say I wanted to darken in maybe the eye cavity. For that I'd make a new layer, select this color, make it a little darker, and go back to the hard round brush. So I paint it in place. Worrying more about the hard edge and less about the cleanliness of the soft edge. Then I select my eraser, go to a soft eraser, and erase away the excess and make that transition. So you can see why working on independent layers is important. Now if I'm happy with the way those two layers work, I can flatten those together with layer, merge down. So now I have a single layer for my rendering information. But while I'm working on it, when I'm laying down the new paint, it's important to keep those separate. At this point, I'm going to finish out the skull, but as you can tell, I've sped up the footage quite a bit. This is one of those processes that does take a while. Like most things in art, you gotta have patience. But if you watch those first few examples, then you know how I'm doing every step along the way. It's just one process repeated over and over. So really, there's not much of a secret to it. Add some with the hard brush, take away some with the soft brush. Very simple. You'll find really that the challenge begins looking at your subject, looking for where's a hard edge and where's a soft edge. It's those hard and soft transitions that interplay across the form that really create a believable surface. And so knowing how to lay down a hard edge and a soft edge comfortably with your paintbrush allows you to focus more on looking at the subject and recording what you see. So I encourage you guys to give this a try. And to help you out with that, I've actually included this drawing of a skull with the reference next to it as a downloadable image at the bottom of the post. So good luck with this and have fun practicing. Thanks for watching, guys. One of the major themes on CtrlPaint is to break down difficult challenges into manageable pieces. And when digital artists start out, it seems like surface identification is a common weakness. So in this video, I'm going to show you a painting study that I do that practices painting difficult surfaces. But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the CtrlPaint store. So when I say surface identification, what I mean is the way that light falls across different surfaces. For instance, if you're to take a look around your desk right now, it's likely that you've got some shiny objects and some surfaces that are more of a matte finish. Well, this has to do with the subtle surface texture. And when you're trying to paint realistic things, making sure you know which material is which will really help sell the image. I got the idea for this study when I looked at the way that 3D artists display and preview their materials. So what I'm going to set out to do is to take a 2D photo of a rock and to try and re-envision that same material wrapped around a three-dimensional sphere like this. So I won't just be copying from the original photo. Instead, I'll be sort of analyzing the shapes and really trying to learn something about it. And in that way, I'll hopefully remember it a little better next time when I want to put it in a real illustration. So what you're looking at here is the photo on the left side, and then on the right side, I've cut a circle out of this layer, and I'll be drawing below it. So you can see as I draw here, it won't leave that circle. So as I look at this, I will be sampling some colors just to get a baseline. But I'm looking for things like, how's the transition between light and dark? In this case, it's pretty smooth. It's a slow change from light to dark because this is a very matte finish. It's not very shiny. And I'm going to first think about the large scale value changes before I think anything about the low relief surface detailing. So at this point I'll probably make a new layer. I'll get a smaller brush, in this case the hard flat. I'm going to start to indicate those stripes of raised rock. So I've jumped ahead a bit here to the point where I'm ready to start defining the edge a little bit. Now if you see the edge in the photo, it's got sort of a stacked quality, like it was slowly eaten away by different levels of water. So I'll show this in my edge. So once again, the major idea here is that I'm looking at it and I'm learning something because I'm not simply copying the photo. It forces me to analyze the forms that I'm seeing and to wrap them around a three-dimensional surface. And hopefully by doing this, you get a better understanding of what the material is and how it reacts to light. And then an added bonus of doing this sort of study is that you can save these things and always be doing different ones. And after a while, you'll end up with a pretty large library of these materials, and you can use them for your own reference. Photoshop is complicated. Painting is complicated. Combining the two can seem extremely complicated. So when you're just starting out, the least you can do is to eliminate one variable from the equation: color. In this video, I'll make a case for learning the fundamentals first in grayscale before you move on to painting with color. But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the CtrlPaint store. Now, I recognize that it's unlikely that you're going to spend years drawing still lifes with a pencil before you ever pick up Photoshop. It may be one of the best ways to learn, but I recognize that it's not terribly realistic. So if you're new to painting, it's worth looking at the way that art school approaches the problem. In art school, you first learn to draw before you learn to paint. If you start out with a pencil, there's only a couple of variables. You're working with lines of varying thickness, and you build up value through hatching. Simple. One step more complicated is charcoal. This gives you the ability to not only lay down lines, but also to blend them together and to create pure value. But either way, each of these is only working in value, no color to worry about. And this is a good thing, because there is so much involved with creating a 3D illusion on a 2D surface. With each mark you make, you're answering a laundry list of questions. How hard is the edge? How directly illuminated is the surface? How close is the viewer to the object? And so on. There's a reason the introductory drawing classes don't allow colored pencils. Beginners already have plenty to think about. But you're using Photoshop, and it does things a bit differently. What it calls the brush tool can drift from pencil to brush, from grayscale to color. And there's no difference in cost. There's not even drying time to worry about. So it can be incredibly tempting to jump straight into color. After all, it's only one click away. But I encourage you to take it one step at a time. If you're doing photo studies, try first turning them into grayscale. If you're able to set up a small still life on your desk, even better. But just think about the light and the shadow. I know that all the video games, movies, and illustrations that you like are in full color, and you'll get there eventually. But trust me on this. Try starting slow and limiting yourself to grayscale for the time being. It really is the surest way to discover lighting and to discover form. Good luck, and thanks for watching. Digital painting often forces you to choose one of two extremes. You either get to have very tight control with a complicated layer stack, or you're going to paint with smooth gestural strokes on a short layer stack, and in doing so give up that control. Well, the Edge Control Premium Series explores a technique that gives you the best of both worlds. You're going to stay away from big, complicated documents, instead we'll paint fluidly, but we'll still retain that tight precision when we want it. To try out all these new techniques, I've included some worksheets as well as a sample illustration, so you can go ahead and follow along with the videos. So to find out how to keep the precision but ditch that layer stack, head on over to the CtrlPaint store today. One of the most common problems faced by painters is material identification. For instance, what are these balls? Without scale reference or context, all the viewer has to go on is the way that the materials reflect light. So in this video, I'm going to explain the importance of glossiness, where to look for it, and I'll suggest an exercise that'll help you hone your eye. But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the CtrlPaint store. So if you guessed that these are both photos of ping pong balls, you'd be halfway right. I actually cheated a bit and hid one important component of the image on the left, so I'll now reveal it. There I edited out the glossy highlight, and in doing so, made it look very similar to the actual ping pong ball on the right. So this glossy or specular highlight can help you identify the proper surface. Let's take a look at some construction materials. You could describe concrete, tile, and granite as all sort of rocky in texture. But when you see them here at a steep angle, their glossy highlights tell a different story. When I hide the color information and make it a grayscale image, it'll become even more evident. See how much sharper the glossy highlight is on those polished materials? Whereas the ceramic tile has a much softer transition from the highlight to the midtone. Also, notice how the polished concrete has sort of a medium scale rippling across the surface? Well, you can actually only see this detail where the glossy highlight describes it. So in that way, a glossy highlight is incredibly important to showing off the form. Because if all you could see of this polished concrete was the bottom third of the image, it would look rather flat. So let's take a quick look at the forces that are causing this variation. So the diagram I've drawn here is not drawn to scale. Where you see the light coming out of a light source, bouncing off the surface and into the viewer's eye, the surface is actually zoomed in 1,000%, like you're looking through a microscope. So what you see here with the polished material is that it's generally flat. It's got a little bit of surface variation, and so some of the light beams will scatter a little bit, but most of them will be cleanly reflected into your eye. So what you're seeing in the halo effect around the glossy highlight is this scattering. Now let's take a look at the tile and see how different that is. So again, when seen at a micro level, this material has a much rougher surface. So you can see the same light sources hitting, but then scattering much more. Because at a micro level, there are thousands of small planes, each reflecting the light at a slightly different direction. So the result is the smoother fall off of the highlight, creating the soft, diffused specularity. So when it comes to painting, the characteristics of your glossy highlights can make a profound difference. So here I copied a simple gray ball 5 times, and then painted a different glossy highlight on each. So everything else about them is identical. But despite this, each indicates a different material, and your brain goes a long way to fill in the rest of the information. So when it comes to realistic surfaces, there's a lot more than simply painting glossy highlights, but it's a really great place to start. To practice this, try making your own sphere studies. So grab a variety of photo references of all sorts of different materials, from very flat to very shiny, make them black and white, and then on each sphere, simply try and reproduce the glossiness seen in each photo. So you don't have to worry about any of the rest of the texture, just the glossy highlight. So this sort of study is a fantastic way to analyze texture and to train your eye to see critically. Hey guys, this is Matt Core from CtrlPaint.com, and today we're going to do a little bit more on lighting and rendering, and I'm going to do a quick sketch of this ear. Because as I've been hearing from you guys, a lot of people are having trouble with their work feeling flat. They just don't quite understand why it's not looking realistic in the way they want. And 9 times out of 10, the answer is because of lighting. In order to make things look three-dimensional, to have form, they have to be well lit. But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the CtrlPaint store. So you can see I've started out with my sketch here with a line drawing on the right. And that was drawn with one of the brushes I made in my custom brush design series. The layer is set to multiply, and for the first half I'm going to be drawing underneath that, so I can get the structure blocked in. And for this whole video, I'm only going to be using one brush. Standard, hard round with a bit of texture on it. So it's going to be easy to render with, but it's also going to have a little bit of textural grit to it. There's a lot of different ways to approach rendering like this, but I really like the temp layer approach. So I've got my value swatches here. I'm going to start with the shadows. So on a new layer, I'm going to be painting in from hard to soft. So I'll start on the hard edge, render out the shadow shape, concentrating most on that way the hard edge looks. And then as it transitions into the highlight shape, I'll use a soft eraser to erase that away. And in fact, I'll even put a little texture on my eraser just so it'll add a little extra grittiness. Okay. So I'll make a new layer, start from the hard edge, and paint out towards the soft. And then erase away the area I don't want. And I find that starting with the shadows like this is a great way to anchor a painting in. Because you could theoretically start with the highlights if you wanted, but there's something about starting with the shadows and then slowly building up to your brightest values that gives it a convincing look. All right, so this is basically the same steps that I'll be repeating over and over. You've seen me do it before. But let's get real for a second. Why am I drawing ears? Why all the grayscale? It seems like this has nothing to do with concept art, nothing to do with dragons, all the fun stuff. But look, this is it. This is how you get better. It may not look fun, but the truth is once you do it a little more, it actually becomes fun. Because all you're doing is looking at light, shadow, and form. You can describe anything visually with form. Adding things like color and texture will be nice, and that's something you get to later. But if you can't get this crucial step, getting the shadows to look correct in order to create sort of a convincing three-dimensional form, well then you'll never make the rest of the stuff work. This is crucial. If you were to go to art school, they'd force you to go to a couple classes of drawing. Drawing 1, drawing 2, even if you are a film major. Oops, this is an important part. Okay, so now I'm halfway through. I'm gonna collapse everything down and start painting on top of my line art because it's all blocked in, so I don't have to worry about the structure. Okay, sorry, back to my diatribe. So this stuff, it is so important. Yes, we are using a computer, and that means we can break certain rules. Drawing this ear in 10 minutes was a lot quicker than I could have done the same with charcoal. And that's where Photoshop helps. But you're only going to get the long-term results you want if you learn in the traditional way. So even if you can't afford art school, you still should mimic drawing 1. In drawing 1, you sit down on a wooden desk and draw still lifes every day for hours. It is boring, but you get much better. And the things you get better at are hard to quantify. What you're doing is you're training your eye to see shape, value, and form. That's something that no Photoshop tutorial is going to help you get better at. The only way to get better at it is looking at still lifes. There's a term I've heard used called pencil mileage. And the idea here is just simply sitting down at your desk, drawing stuff is going to make you better over time. And I really believe in that. If you feel frustrated that your drawings aren't looking three-dimensional, aren't looking realistic, you probably just haven't spent enough hours. Look, if there was an easy way to get better at this stuff, some filter hidden somewhere in the menus, I would have found it by now. It's not there. This is just pure practice. Now, it's careful practice. Don't get me wrong, when I do studies like these, I am not just phoning it in, serving my time. I am looking carefully and studying the surfaces. But this sort of careful, dedicated practice is really the only way to get the results you want. In fact, I think it's best to do just grayscale. Limit it down to pure form. Because once you understand form, then you're in. You can paint directly in color if you want, but you'll be understanding values as you paint the color in. So I'm not even advocating a grayscale to color workflow. I'm simply advocating learning and internalizing form. And really the only way to do that is lots of practice. So I hope that in some way CtrlPaint can stand in as a drawing one for Photoshop. In fact, that's why I created the Basic Rendering for Photoshop series. It is, in some small part, like a Drawing 1 course. Because what I'm doing here is I'm drawing light and shadow, but based on an understanding of how basic types of light work. And that's what the Basic Rendering series is all about. I talk about the difference between direct light or indirect light. What's ambient occlusion? Because knowing about light and how to see its effects is really the secret to painting everything. It's how you're going to paint Space Marines, but this has to come first. So get out there and practice your form. Practice your lighting and your value. Of course, I'd encourage you to get the series found in the store, which is exactly about these subjects. But this is an old topic. If you like learning from books better, there's plenty of books on this in the library. Now, however you do it, learn this subject. It is the foundation to everything else you're going to do in painting. That's why you do it first at art school. So good luck, and thanks for watching, guys. I'm sure you've asked yourself at some point, how many layers should I have in my Photoshop painting? Well, this is actually an incredibly old question, because there was a time long before Photoshop where artists had very expensive pigment. In fact, it was so expensive they had to invent a way to make sure they didn't waste it. They wanted to avoid mistakes. So what they created was called indirect painting, in which you'd come to your colors slowly through layering. So I want to give you a quick overview of the two primary types of painting, so you can consider them when you're making your choice about how many layers to have in your Photoshop document. But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the CtrlPaint store. So I should start off by asking you, can you see a difference between these two colors? No matter how hard you look, you won't be able to, because on a computer screen, they're exactly the same. In fact, they have what's called a hex value, which is a very specific way of telling the computer exactly what color it is. What you don't know is the process through which I found these two colors. On the left, you see indirect painting. This is where I layered a couple different multiply layers over top of a gray stroke, and what I ended up with was that color, 5E679B. On the right, I opened up my color picker, carefully selected it manually, and then laid down on a single stroke. And what you're seeing here are the two primary types of painting, indirect on the left and direct on the right. If you're using direct painting, odds are your layer stack could be very short. You could do 2 or 3 layers for the entire painting. On the other hand, if you were using indirect painting, you would probably have more layers, which could slow down your computer. So each has their own benefits, and they also have their own downfalls. It's generally harder to do direct painting because you don't have the benefit of finding your values and finding your colors through layering. You just have to pick a color and go with it. But if you can do that, it ends up being a more lightweight, quick workflow. Because unlike those painters from hundreds of years ago, you don't have to worry about certain pigments costing more than other pigments. You can use any color you want. But indirect painting has a great way of avoiding risk. If you start with an underpainting and then build up on top of it, you know at every stage of the game that it's working for you. I like to recommend indirect painting to beginners because it's a great way to build up a drawing slowly. Also knowing that it will have a few more layers in the long run. But that's okay because you can flatten them down as you go. But if you're really feeling bold and have good observational skills, try some direct painting where you pick the colors on your color picker and apply them directly to the canvas. So hopefully this will help you decide how many layers to paint with as you're painting and know a little bit about the history of it all. Thanks for watching. Hey guys, this is Matt Core from CtrlPaint.com, and today we're going to talk a bit about thinking like a painter. As in, when you're using paint, digital or traditional, you've just got different options than you do if you're using something like a pen. Because when you're doing something like a comic book, you've got very hard edges to work with, and so that gives you a different set of choices. But when you're working with paint, you have a very soft medium, and that gives you both sharp edges as well as soft edges if you choose to use them. So I'm going to do a quick study today looking at these leaves in Sunbeam, and I'm going to do it thinking like a painter, utilizing what are called lost edges, or very, very soft edges. But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the CtrlPaint store. So on the left, you see I've got a photo of some leaves from Flickr. And on the right, I just did a quick block-in drawing just to get my shapes aligned. Although unlike that comic book example, it's really only an underdrawing. They're not even on their own layer. So in today's video, it doesn't matter exactly the technique I'm using to paint with. The important part is the way I'm thinking about it. So I'm going to begin by painting in the shadow color of the leaf. This is the half that's not illuminated. And I'm really just going to be very loose and gestural here. Now I'm going to paint in the illuminated half. And you can tell I've made some color swatches ahead of time to help me get my colors straight. And you can see where these two areas of color meet. It is a pretty hard line. That's the hard edge of the illuminated area. And I could also give some information about the shape of this leaf. So I'll zoom in a bit here and give it sort of a jagged edge because that's the way the leaf looks. And I'm using the eraser to define this. And because this is so highly illuminated, it's going to bring out little details like the veins. They're going to be very visible. And I could detail in this way for a while, but the idea is that this area that's starkly illuminated is going to have a lot more information. And that's going to lead to very hard edges. Well, now if you look at this bottom half of the leaf, you can certainly tell that it's there, but it doesn't need to be terribly sharp. And here's where the lost edge idea comes in. There is almost no sharpness at all on this edge. In fact, I could make it even more lost if I wanted. So what this means is I'm really blending from the background into the foreground, which is the shadowy part of the leaf, allowing it to really be a soft transition. But here where it's illuminated, it's a much sharper transition. So I paused the video and I've gone ahead and finished out the sketch. And when you look at it, it's obvious that this is leaves in a sunbeam. And really, your brain is doing way more work than I ever did with the painting, because those shadow areas of the leaves have essentially zero detail in them. I'm reserving my detail and my sharpness for the illuminated areas. And what that does is it sort of activates the painting. And if you zoom in here, you can see that there's really not much going on in these shadow shapes. There's a lot of lost edges. And then I have some nice sharpness on the edges that are illuminated. And this is something that's only possible with paint. And what I'm doing here is I'm leaving a little mystery. And it doesn't seem like that actively, but when the viewer is given an opportunity to use their imagination to fill in the cracks, they will, and they enjoy it. So no matter how you actually paint this effect, the important takeaway here is thinking like a painter. Because if I were to draw this same image in a comic panel, it would have a very different look. I would have a different set of options made possible by the pen. But the paint allows me to give an entirely different range of marks for the edges. And so it's great sometimes to let some of them fade off into nothing. Don't worry about complete sharpness in your entire painting. So go give this a try. Go lose some edges. Have fun, and thanks for watching, guys. Hey guys, this is Matt Core from CtrlPaint.com. Now, in the last few weeks, I've been working very hard creating this new series called Edge Control, which is going to be available at the end of the week in the CtrlPaint store. And in working on it, I've just come to remember how nice it is to paint flat. Well, in this demo I'm painting right now, I started with a sketch, and then I did some rough block in, but then at that point, very early in the process, I flattened it down. I'm working only on 1 or 2 layers at a time, and I'm not deriving control through the layer stack. I'm painting much more like a traditional painter would, using thick, opaque paint. Because creativity is a funny thing, and I can't begin to explain how it works, but I know that when I have to break my concentration for any reason, my painting is in danger. It's when I get into that flow state where I'm just doing one move after another, sort of intuitively, that really good things happen. It's when I feel like I have tunnel vision and I forget time's passing and I just work. Well, I think there's a pretty direct relationship between the way you interact with Photoshop and your opportunity to fall into a flow state like this. If you're constantly fumbling with menus and trying to remember what a certain command is called, you're not going to get there. But when you're working flat like this, it's a different story. It's much more smooth and direct. You're just thinking about fewer things and focusing on the creative act. And 2 nice things happen when we paint this way. First thing, there's a history that builds up. And I'm not talking about history in the Photoshop sense. I'm talking about brush marks that overlay one another and mistakes that happen. There's just sort of a richness that develops. Because when you have lots of layers, you have the ability to be very perfect and very careful. And if you make any mistakes, you can just throw them away. But when you're working in this way with very flat canvas, you end up sort of having a record of those mistakes. But over time, they build up and add a nice natural quality to the painting. You can also see that the line art is becoming worked right into the painting in a much more natural way. Because we know it's really easy to use Photoshop to keep that line art separate from the paint until at the very end, or potentially to keep them separated forever, as if you're doing a comic book. And that's fine, but this has a certain sort of feeling when your lines become edges and then sometimes fade away completely because they are underneath the paint, not on top of it. It's a nice way to get lost edges and careful nuance. And maybe the most important thing that happens is I've stopped planning. It's no longer a puzzle, it's just sort of an intuitive sort of painting, where I'm more likely to fall into that flow state, where I'm working intuitively in almost a stream of consciousness method, because I'm not thinking about menus, I'm not thinking about layers and buttons. Especially when I use keyboard shortcuts, working in this way is a much more direct connection between me and the canvas. Now, at the end of this week, I'm launching a new series in the store, which is called Edge Control, and it really is about finding this balance between loose, direct painting, like I'm doing here, and the fine control that Photoshop offers. Until then, though, I really encourage you to just spend some time working flatter than you normally do. Maybe you limit yourself to doing a study or possibly a painting from direct observation. But whatever subject you choose, the important part is to work loose. It's possible that you normally use lots and lots of layers for very careful control. And at least for this week, let's just forget about that. Let's not use the fancy tools that Photoshop offers with layers and modes. and let's just paint. It might be very different from the way you normally work. I know it's different from the way I normally work, but it serves as a really great reminder of just how simple digital painting can be. So when I do studies and practice this week, I am going to do them all as flat as possible, and I encourage you to join along with me. You never know, you might have some fun. Thanks for coming to the site, guys. Hey guys, this is Matt Core from CtrlPaint.com, and in today's video we're going to finish up the process I started in the last video, so if you haven't seen that yet, there's a link in the post description. And as you can see, the painting has progressed a little bit since you last saw it. I've just done a little more refining. And in a lot of cases, that's what painting flat is all about. You start rough, and then you work your way around the image, looking for problems, and then you polish a little here and a little there. But as a quick reminder, if you look below the post, you'll find links for free brushes and worksheets, as well as in-depth premium series available in the CtrlPaint store. Well, especially if you're new, it can be really hard to know what's the next step to take. How do I know what to polish? What even needs fixing? Well, in this case, I have reference. And so really what I'm trying to do is make my art match what I'm looking at. And although sometimes you'd just be working from your head. But a great place to start looking is an intersection between two areas of value or color at an edge. So I might say something like, the top of this vessel is not bright enough. And that can mean one of two things, because this is all relative. I could either darken down the background, and automatically that makes the lip look a little bit brighter because all of a sudden it's sort of a relative shift in value. Or I could leave the background as it is and brighten up this lip. And in doing so, it sort of makes that background look a little bit darker. Now, as you saw, I didn't actually change the background value there. I just changed one, and the other one just looks different. It's sort of an optical illusion. And for me, refining a painting just goes like this over and over and over. I notice right next to it, I have another problem. This vessel is supposed to be a bit brighter, so I might brighten up this one. Or alternatively, I could darken down the background. Either way, this edge becomes more prominent, and they have a relatively higher contrast between the two in value. So you can see it's a bit like tug of war, because if I darken down the background here, all of a sudden it's going to call more attention to this relationship, which will in turn make this seem brighter. And if possibly that makes it too bright, I might then have to retroactively darken the lip of this vessel to make it relatively the correct contrast between the background, which is now a darker value, and the lip. And with a bunch of different surfaces and different elements in your composition, this tug of war can go back and forth until you find just the right balance. Because we are not printers. We don't start in the left-hand corner and progress perfectly across the image. We just don't work that way. It's all a push and pull. You put something down, and then you start comparing. And zooming away from your image is a great way to do that, because this will give you a sort of high-level view. Another thing I like to do is to flip the image. This will show you errors right away. Gives you a nice fresh look on things. But none of these things I'm doing require me to have lots of layers. So here one more time, I can flatten all these layers down, zoom in, and keep painting. I can just keep working on those relationships. I might ask myself, is this surface bright enough? Well, maybe not. And then once I brighten it up to match my reference, I begin to have too much contrast between this shape and the shape next to it. So I'll also need to brighten this one as well. And according to my reference, there's even a little more contrast between this surface and the background, so I'll need to darken down the background a bit. And in this way, I just work on that overall balance between all the values in my composition. Now, all of this is made way easier if you can do one thing, which is recall these edges. Because in this image, once I get the basics established, I might be changing these values over and over and over, but the shapes are not moving anywhere. So it's hugely valuable for me to be able to have Photoshop save some of these shapes for easy recall. So I can just click once and then have the ability to paint on one side of an edge or on the other side of an edge. And that is what the Edge Control series is really all about. It's acknowledging that painting loose doesn't need to mean painting sloppy. There's a way to have both tight edge control and also not a lot of layers. And if this topic is something that interests you, I definitely encourage you to check out Edge Control in the CtrlPaint store today. Thanks for coming to the site, guys.